The photos look like pure fairy tale. Flash bulbs popping, a polished smile, a couple frozen in perfect glossy romance. But just off camera, in the quiet space before the vows, something didn't fit that picture at all. Imagine the hum of last-minute whispers, the stiff tug of a collar, the air feeling too tight to breathe, and then a line so chilling it practically erases the sparkle. "I don't have a choice." That's not the kind of sentence you expect on a day like this. So what was happening behind those closed doors? And why did everything move like it had to be finished fast? Stay with me, because by the end, that one phrase will hit completely differently. To the outside world, it was supposed to be that moment, the one people replay in their heads like a highlight reel. The king, dressed sharp, standing under bright lights and even brighter expectations, giving the kind of "I do" everyone had already written into the story. Fans pictured romance. Reporters pictured history. The cameras were ready for a grand, glowing scene. One of those once-in-a-lifetime snapshots where everything feels slow, sacred, and perfectly timed. But then you look closer, and the timeline starts acting strange. The ceremony, this huge headline-making milestone, moves like it's on fast forward. The kind of blink and you missed it event people later describe as lasting about 8 minutes, with only 14 guests watching it happen. And right after that, not a long, dreamy celebration, not hours of basking in the moment, instead a press conference that lasts longer than the vows themselves, like the public version of the day mattered more than the private one. And that's where the uneasy question creeps in. If this was truly the happiest day, if everything was as magical as the photos promised, why did it feel like it was being managed like a tight schedule? Why the small room, the quick finish, the immediate pivot to microphones and headlines? Weddings usually linger. This one seemed to move. And once you notice that, it's hard not to wonder what exactly everyone was rushing past. The story doesn't unfold slowly the way you'd expect. It snaps into place in a way that feels almost unreal when you lay it out. They meet when she's 14, and by 15 she's living in his world, inside the orbit of a life already too big for normal rules. Years pass under bright lights and heavier shadows until the timeline lands on a clean, official date. May 1st, 1967, when she's 21, and the relationship finally becomes something the public can photograph, headline, and package as destiny. On paper, it looks like a straight line. In real life, straight lines usually hide a lot of turns. And the two people inside that story don't seem to want the same thing at the same speed. On one side, there's someone who wants certainty, something formal, something solid, something that can't be explained away with maybe or someday. On the other side, there's a man who loved the idea of forever when it was just an idea, romantic, shiny, safe at a distance, but got noticeably cautious the moment forever required a calendar date. He could talk around marriage, circle it, tease it, hint at it, yet still hesitate when it came time to actually step into it. That contrast is what makes the final switch so hard to ignore. Because if someone is famously gun-shy about commitment, they don't suddenly sprint to the finish line without a reason. Something changes, something tightens. The tone shifts from if to when, and then suddenly it's happening. So what finally pushed him from flirting with the concept to standing there for real, with the whole world watching? Not every secret comes from a stranger in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from someone so familiar they blend into the background. Someone who's always there, always trusted, always safe. That's why Alberta Holman matters in this story. She wasn't a random name chasing a headline. She was a steady presence inside the inner circle, close enough to see what cameras never could, close enough to notice when the air in the room changed and nobody wanted to say why. And according to what's been shared, the moment she walked in, she didn't find glamour. She didn't find excitement. She found the opposite of the fairy tale. Someone overwhelmed, breaking down in a way that doesn't fit the picture the world was about to be sold. Imagine it, the hush of a private room, the weight of expensive fabric, the faint scent of cologne and hairspray hanging in the air, and then the sound you don't expect on a day like that. Quiet sobbing, raw and uncontrolled, like something inside finally cracked under pressure. So she asked the question any normal person would ask. Simple, direct, almost desperate in its logic. If this is wrong, if this is too much, if you're in this kind of pain, why not stop it? Why not call it off before the doors open and the whole thing becomes permanent? It's the kind of question that gives someone an exit, a lifeline, a chance to breathe again. And that's when the answer, the one line that still makes people pause, comes in, flat, chilling, and strangely final. I don't have a choice. Not I'm nervous, not I'm scared, not even I don't know. Just that. And once you hear it, you realize this wasn't ordinary wedding day emotion. Because heartbreak sounds like regret. This sounded like restraint, like something invisible had already decided the ending. The moment the ceremony ends, you'd expect the day to open up, to breathe. A wedding, especially one this famous, usually spills into hours of warmth and lingering hugs, champagne clinks, that soft afterglow where time stops behaving like time. But here, it doesn't unfold like that. It pivots. Almost immediately, the day tilts towards something more controlled. A press conference, microphones, questions, polished answers, followed by a lavish breakfast reception reportedly costing around $10,000, filled with industry people and associates. It's the kind of guest list that feels curated, less closest hearts, more closest connections, and that's where the seams start to show. Because while the public-facing celebration is running smoothly, the private circle isn't. Some of the people you'd assume would be there, the ones who'd been around for the real messy years, aren't even invited. And when you start hearing names tied to anger and fallout, it stops sounding like a simple oversight. One of Elvis's longtime friends, Red West, is described as being furious enough to quit. That's not the kind of reaction you get from a normal wedding snub. That's the kind of reaction you get when someone feels locked out of something they think they understand, and suddenly realizes they don't. Then comes the speed. No slow transition, no drawn-out celebration, no long romantic pause where everyone soaks it in. It's a quick exit, private plane, wheels up, gone. And the honeymoon that follows is brief, a reported 3-day trip to Palm Springs. 3 days. For a moment that had been years in the making, the wrap-up happens so fast it feels like someone is trying to close the curtain before the audience can look too closely at the stage. And that's the part that sticks. Because weddings that are truly joyful tend to linger. People stretch the night, drag out the last dance, make excuses to stay a little longer because they don't want it to end. But when something is strategic, when it's being managed, protected, or pushed along, people don't linger. They move. And the way this day moved leaves you with a question you can't quite shake. What was everyone trying to get past so quickly? By this point, the pieces don't feel random anymore. They feel arranged. The speed of the day, the strange priorities, the fractures in the inner circle, the quotes that sound less like romance and more like a deadline, it all points toward the same unsettling possibility. Maybe this wasn't simply a personal decision unfolding naturally. Maybe it was shaped, nudged, managed, cornered by someone close, or by a situation that tightened around him until there was only one acceptable outcome. But here's where it gets complicated, because this isn't a story with one neat villain and one clean answer. What exists is a trail of competing explanations, some repeated as rumor, some tied to first-hand accounts and interviews, some whispered by people who claim they saw the private moments no camera ever captured. And when you line those versions up side by side, the real tension isn't just what happened, it's which version makes the most sense once you see how carefully everything was moving toward that day. One explanation people whisper about isn't romantic at all. It's procedural, almost cold. The idea is that a certain father figure, after years of watching a relationship exist in a gray zone, finally reached a breaking point. Not because he wanted headlines, but because he wanted security. Something official, something defensible, something that couldn't be undone with a shrug. In that version of events, the tension isn't about love, it's about risk. Ages, boundaries, the kind of legal consequences no superstar name can magically erase. And once legal language enters a conversation like that, everything suddenly has a deadline. Then there's the darker rumor. One that spreads because it's dramatic, not because it's proven. The claim goes like this. that someone close might have threatened to expose details that would shatter the clean, public image. It's the kind of story people repeat in hushed tones because it sounds like Hollywood, because it fits the idea that fame always has leverage hidden behind it. But here's what makes it more complicated. That same person has repeatedly rejected the rumor and insisted the real pressure came from somewhere else. Which raises a question that's hard to ignore. If the ugly story isn't true, why did it catch fire so easily in the first place? And then there's the pressure point that doesn't arrive as a rumor at all. It arrives as a quote. In a Barbara Walters interview, there's an implication that the push came from the business side, from the person whose job was to keep the machine running smoothly. The phrase associated with that moment is blunt enough to feel like a switch being flipped. Either get married or go on. Not take your time, not follow your heart, just a business-like fork in the road. And if you're wondering how a personal milestone could start to sound like a professional ultimatum, you're exactly where the story gets interesting. At a certain point, the question stops being, who did this? And turns into something quieter, and maybe more unsettling. What did this from the inside? Because pressure doesn't always show up as a threat from another person. Sometimes it shows up as a private rule you can't break, a belief you can't untangle, a version of yourself you've built so carefully that you're terrified of what happens if it cracks. And when someone is famous, that internal cage can get even smaller, because the whole world thinks it knows you, even while you're trying to keep parts of yourself locked away. That's why so many accounts and commentators return to one particular tension in his personal life. This intense fixation on purity, on the idea of virginity, and the strange, uneven dynamic it created. It's not just a detail, it's a kind of lens. Because when someone turns intimacy into a standard, a test, or a symbol, love stops being simple. It becomes loaded. It becomes controlled. And control can feel safe until it starts controlling you. Then the pregnancy arrives like a turning point you can't edit out. Behind the scenes, there's a fear that's painfully human. What if this changes how he looks at me? What if the relationship shifts from romance to responsibility, something heavier, something that can't be switched off when the mood changes? And in the way the story gets told afterward, that fear isn't paranoia. It becomes reality. The emotional temperature changes. The roles change. The relationship stops being about us and starts being about what each person represents. In later reflections, especially in the Barbara Walters conversation, there's an admission that hits with an eerie kind of sadness, that he struggled with seeing her as a mother, and that she later felt he was almost a father figure to her. Think about that for a second. That's not a typical love story. That's a knot of power, protection, and imbalance, where affection exists, but so does something else that's harder to name. And when a relationship starts feeling like a role you're trapped in, it's not surprising that the choices begin to feel smaller and smaller. So maybe the pressure wasn't one person standing in a doorway with an ultimatum. Maybe it was the collision between image, control, and intimacy, three forces pulling in different directions until something had to give. And once you see that collision clearly, you start to understand why a public moment could look so perfect, while privately feeling like there was nowhere left to go. What makes the tension around that day feel even heavier is what comes next, because the story doesn't settle into the calm, happily ever after rhythm people expected. Not long after, a new life enters the picture. Lisa Marie is born on April 1st, 1968, and for a moment it looks like that should be the anchor, the thing that steadies everything. But time has a way of exposing what a single event can't fix. The cracks don't disappear, they widen. And by February 1972, the relationship has unraveled to the point of separation. Like the weight that was being held in private finally becomes too much to carry in the open. When you look back with that timeline in mind, the phrase "I don't have a choice" starts to sound less like one dramatic moment and more like a summary of an entire pressure system closing in. Maybe it was career calculus, the machine that never stopped, never slowed, never cared how you felt. Maybe it was family pressure, or legal fear, or a manager's cold, business-like ultimatum. Or maybe it was something deeper and harder to admit. The private terror of change, of losing control, of being trapped in a role you can't rewrite once the world has already printed the headline. And the most unsettling possibility is that it wasn't just one thing. It was all of them at once, stacking until choice didn't feel like a real option anymore. So here's what I want to know, and I want you to be honest, even if the answer feels uncomfortable. If you heard someone whisper, "I don't have a choice," the night before their wedding, who would you suspect first? A person behind the scenes? The people closest to them? Or the invisible pressure of reputation, power, and expectations that can push even the biggest stars into a corner? If you're into stories like this, where the public version looks perfect, but the real truth feels buried, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this video has you questioning what was really happening behind the scenes, tap like to help more people find it. Now I want to hear your take. What do you think was really driving everything? Was it one person, a bigger system, or something more personal? Drop your thoughts and opinions in the comments. And if you know someone who loves deep dive stories like this, share this video with them, because this is the kind of mystery that gets even more interesting the more people weigh in.